Away a couple days ago over the weekend, and she was 94 years old and so blessed. And so I honor her today, and I honor with Saving Moses, because really my heart.
The final days of a life are often remembered not for what is lost, but for what is said when everything else falls away. And in the case of Marilyn Hickey, those closest to her believe her last words and final reflections carried the same message she had shared for decades: faith, peace, and unwavering purpose. Because even before her passing, there was a sense among family and followers that something had shifted. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, spiritual way that people often only recognize in hindsight. Marilyn Hickey passed away at the age of 95 after a period of natural health decline. Reports indicate she died peacefully at home, surrounded by family and close loved ones. There was no sudden emergency, no unexpected turn, just a gradual transition that reflected the same calm dignity she carried in her later years. But what people have been talking about since her passing is not just how she died. It's what she said before she did. And that is where the story becomes deeply emotional. In the weeks leading up to her passing, those close to her noticed subtle but meaningful changes in her conversations. She spoke less about the future in practical terms and more about reflection, gratitude, and readiness. Not fear, not hesitation, but acceptance. According to family accounts shared through her ministry circle, Marilyn Hickey often expressed appreciation for the life she had lived. She would speak about her travels, her teachings, and the global reach of her ministry, but always return to one central theme: faith as a journey, not just a belief system. And that message became even more present in her final conversations. But that's not the whole story. Her daughter, Sarah Bowling, later shared emotional reflections about those final moments and what her mother said in the days before her passing. Sarah described them not as dramatic last words, but as gentle, meaningful expressions of peace. She recalled her mother speaking about finishing well, about completing what she felt she was called to do, and about trusting that her life's work would continue beyond her physical presence. Those words carried weight, because they were not spoken as farewell in a fearful sense, but as confirmation. Sarah Bowling explained that her mother's final days were marked by calmness. There were moments of prayer, quiet reflection, and family presence. Conversations were slower, more intentional, and deeply personal. And in those conversations, Marilyn Hickey often returned to the idea of legacy, not in terms of fame or recognition, but in terms of impact. Who had been helped, who had found hope, who had been encouraged to continue their own journey of faith. That, she believed, was what mattered most. But what truly stood out to those around her was not just what she said. It was how she said it. There was no urgency in her voice, no regret, only clarity. And that clarity became something her family held onto in the days after her passing. Sarah Bowling described one moment in particular where her mother spoke about peace, not as something distant or abstract, but as something she felt already present, as if she had already made her peace with what was coming. And that perspective changed the emotional experience for those around her, because instead of viewing it as an ending, they began to see it as transition, as continuation, as completion of a long and purposeful journey. In the broader ministry community, those final reflections have been shared and discussed with deep respect. Many see them as consistent with the message Marilyn Hickey preached throughout her life: faith during uncertainty, strength during change, and trust beyond circumstance. But there is also a personal layer that cannot be ignored. For Sarah Bowling, these final words were not just spiritual reflections. They were the voice of a mother, a guide, a lifelong presence who had shaped her understanding of faith and purpose. And that made the experience both meaningful and emotional. In her tribute, Sarah emphasized that her mother did not approach death as something to fear or resist, but as something to understand within the context of belief. Not as loss alone, but as fulfillment. And that message resonated strongly with those who attended the memorial service that followed. Because when people gathered to remember Marilyn Hickey, they did not only speak about what she had done, they spoke about what she had believed, and how that belief shaped every stage of her life. From early ministry work to global outreach, from teaching to writing, from public speaking to quiet personal moments, her consistency was a defining trait. And in her final days, that consistency remained. There were no contradictions in her message, no sudden shifts in perspective, only a continuation of what she had always expressed. Faith as foundation, purpose as direction, peace as outcome. As Sarah Bowling concluded her reflections publicly, she encouraged others not to focus only on the loss, but on the message left behind. A message she described as simple, yet powerful. Live with intention, serve with purpose, and trust the journey. And in that she believed, her mother's voice still continues. Even now, even after her passing. Because sometimes, what someone says before they leave becomes the part that stays the longest. And in Marilyn Hickey's case, those final reflections were not an ending. They were a continuation of everything she had lived for. A message that remains, even in silence,